Hello! Welcome back to Chapter 4 of Unpacking Old Luggage. And today we're going to be talking about several things that deal with nutrition and physical activity. And I know you guys have been doing physical activity every other week, so I'm going to kind of dive into it so you have another understanding of what you're doing too on those physical activity weeks. But today we're going to talk about some hormones, some disease risks, some physical activity debunking myths, and our hunger scale. I have got quite a bit of charts and some diagrams that I'm going to show you that aren't in the book. So please pay attention, and because I'm going to try to cover it all in detail. So I'm sure that they are going to download this also on the Facebook site, and you can rewatch it again, and it might be a good benefit to rewatch it again. I'm not going to try to overload you with a lot of information, but I think it's just so pertinent that you understand it all and grasp it all. So, all right, let's get started. Here we have the circle of obesity. We've got diabetes, heart disease, GERD or acid reflux, high blood pressure, cancer, and sleep apnea. All of these are all intertwined with obesity. The more weight we gain, the higher our risk of all of these things happening. And what also happens really is a hormone imbalance that takes place. Once you start to gain weight, all of these will slowly, eventually surface. So what we're going to dive into is really hormone balancing. And the one hormone that we do have control over, directly control over, is our insulin. And insulin is controlled by the foods that we choose to eat and how much we eat of them and how often we eat of them. The insulin is produced by an organ called the pancreas, which is right below the lower part of your rib cage. Last week, we had talked about the three macronutrient families, the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins. Each one of them plays a very specific role in your body. So we're going to break it down now. Your carbohydrates will be broken down into glucose, also called blood sugars, and those will be evenly dispersed to your liver as a stored form of sugar and to muscle glycogen stores, which is your source of energy while you're working out, lifting weights, things like that. Now, once you have those muscle stores all filled up, any excess amount of carbohydrates you consume will be stored in body fat stores. And your first source of energy that your body's going to go to is your carbohydrates, but it's going to go from your muscles before it actually comes from your actual fat stores. The next one is your fat, and your fat will break down into fatty acids, which will, if you overconsume, will also be stored in body fat stores. Your protein is the next one, and it's broken down into amino acids. They all play a very specific role too. It will be stored in body proteins, which helps basically at your muscles. It helps your muscles to recover because when you're exercising, you're making tiny little hair-like structures or tears in your muscle fibers, and your protein actually acts like a Band-Aid to heal it. Those layers of Band-Aids on top of each other basically builds up the toned muscle look or the built look. It also, any excess could be shot out basically through your urine, a loss of nitrogen in your urine. Any excess amount will also be stored in body fat stores, which is very, very unlikely. In fact, protein and fat is very unlikely to be stored in body fat stores. The majority of your body fat stores is due to overconsumption of carbohydrates. And that's the reason why most Americans are definitely gaining weight, and we're consuming a lot of carbohydrates that are not God-made, they're more processed. The more carbohydrates you consume, this is going to react with that pancreas that I mentioned earlier, the pancreas that actually produces our metabolic hormone called insulin. The more carbohydrates you consume, the more that pancreas has to produce insulin to be shot into the bloodstream to bring down those blood sugars that you just consumed from that meal. The more you overwork that pancreas, it doesn't have time to rest and recoup, because the more you overwork it, the more insulin is going to have to be produced, and in time that pancreas could wear out, which means less insulin will be produced. When that happens, your blood sugar or glucose will remain high. This is when your doctor will diagnose you with diabetes. So you never want to overwork that pancreas, and the way to prevent that is by limiting how many carbohydrates you consume at one meal setting. Now, another refresher too, your glycogen stores are your muscle stores that are used up while you are lifting weights and exercising at a higher intensity. These are very important because that's your instant source of energy, so you can't totally cut out your carbs. You have to have that to be refueled. But once those stores are replenished after your workout, and you've got no more stores left to replenish, any excess is going to be stored in body fat, making you gain weight. The more you gain weight, the more all those other metabolic hormones we just talked about is going to start happening. It's the heart disease, the reflux, it's the sleep apnea, all of that goes into play. So carbohydrates, we need them, but we need a limited amount of them, and we need to avoid any of the processed ones. Try to stay with the complex, the very God-made foods and not man-made. This kind of shows the endless cycle. When you have overeating, especially if you're carbohydrates, that does lead to obesity, which will then lead to basically your enlarged fat cells. Like I mentioned, the excess amount of carbohydrates is stored in fat cells, so it's going to enlarge them, which is going to bring on insulin resistance, which brings on type 2 diabetes, which again is going to bring on that increased appetite. So getting control of those carbohydrates now is going to be a huge benefit for later. This is a drawing of your pancreas and your stomach. Your stomach actually changes the food into glucose or blood sugars, and it enters into the bloodstream at this point. Then the pancreas, which is right along the stomach area, actually secretes that insulin. And again, if you overwork the pancreas in time, that will wear out to where it's not going to produce the insulin that it needs to produce going into that bloodstream. So your blood sugars are going to end up remaining high. Blood sugar builds up in that bloodstream, and it causes lots of damage to your eyes, your kidneys, and your feet. So, in fact, I work in a dialysis clinic, and I've had several patients that let their blood sugars get out of control. So now their kidneys are dead. They're on a dialysis machine, and they've got amputations, and their eyesight is going down. I absolutely love this little picture chart here. It's your sugar addiction, the cycle that we all tend to fall into every once in a while. The thing is, you've got to get off the cycle. You've got to get off the roller coaster. If you eat just sugar, you're going to like it and crave it because it definitely has some addictive properties. Because, as you see in step number 2, several things take place. Your blood sugar levels spike. This is when your pancreas has to secrete that extra insulin. So you've got a mass amount of insulin that's been secreted to drop those blood sugar levels back down, because when they're high, it's damaging your eyes, your kidneys, and your feet. But some other things happen too. That dopamine is actually released in the brain. It's a chemical, a natural dopamine, which basically is the addiction type of hormone. This is the same addiction hormone that takes place with alcoholics and drug addicts, you name it, they're all the same type of addiction hormone. Well, once that insulin is shot into the bloodstream to take in all those blood sugars that you just consumed, now there's something else that takes place. Step number 3. The blood sugar levels are going to fall very rapidly because all the high insulin levels that has been shot out all at once, it's now going to take all those extra sugars, because they're not all going to go into the carb store or into the glycogen stores in the muscles, especially if they've already been replenished. All that extra amount that the insulin is going to haul over is actually going to go right into fat storage. When that happens, the body's going to start craving that lost sugar high. So now you're at the bottom of the roller coaster because the insulin brought it down, but you're craving the high again. So there it goes, right back to number 4, the hunger and the cravings. The low blood sugar levels cause the increased appetite and cravings again, and there goes the cycle. You're going back to the high. Okay, on page 48, I hope you have it numbered, we have the hunger scale on a scale of 1 to 5. Number 1 is I'm starving. You can eat anything in sight. Your stomach's ate a hole in your backbone. Never want you to get to the number 1 phase. Number 2 is actually where you can taste the food. It tastes delicious. You can savor God's natural sweetness and saltiness in your foods. this really is the best time to eat. You have a slight hunger, so you can have a little bit of growling taking place. Number 3 is the neutral, not the time to eat. So if it's the time that you're going to go hang out with your friends, just get something to drink. Get some water with lemon in it. Number 4 is the barely full. This is your satisfied phase. Now I want you to put an X right before you get to number 4. And I want you to circle number 2. You need to start eating at a number 2 and stop eating right before you get to the number 4. So number 5 is the Thanksgiving stuffed. You're so full you're having to unbutton the top button on your pants just to give you some breathing room, but yet you're going back just an hour or two later for that pumpkin pie or lemon pie. So this is something you want to avoid. This is where you're going to actually have the problems with the carbohydrates, storing everything in your body in the form of a fat. So really limit that area. Pay close attention to your hunger pangs. Your body is going to give you the signals. God put that in you. So if you're hungry, you need to eat. Again, you want to try to eat about every 4 to 6 hours if you're eating about 3 meals a day. If you're eating 5 to 7 meals a day, like I like to eat 7 meals a day, I'm eating about every 2 to 3 hours. The protein is your metabolic fire, so it's going to fire up that furnace pretty quickly and stimulate the metabolism. So that's the reason why I like to eat about 7 meals a day. So listen to your body. Listen to those hunger cues. And eat when your body says eat. Stop when your body says stop. I also want to point out, too, that it takes a good 12 to 15 minutes before the hormonal signals travel from your stomach, up your spine, into your brainstem to tell you you are full. So if you're a fast eater, you need to slow down and allow that communication to take place. If you're not a fast eater, then you're great. Still listen to those hunger cues. But slow down, take your time, enjoy the food. You'll actually eat a lot less if you slow down, because if you gobble it up in 5 minutes, you're still going to be hungry if you go immediately for some more food. This gives you a little bit more chance for that communication to take place and less chance of you over-consuming. Now let's debunk some diet myths. I've got a few in the book, but I want to cover a few more with you that's not in the book. Here's some common concepts, misconceptions actually, I must say. Too low of fat, because you're so afraid of fat, you're actually going to tend to eat higher carbs. The protein really doesn't stay or really doesn't change. It's just the fat tends to go too low because everybody eats the fat-free everything. Well, when you replace fat with something else, it's actually going to tend to be higher carbs. Well, here's the problem. For every gram of carbohydrate you take in, there's actually a tax. And this tax basically is going to be accompanied by 3 grams of water, which, if you step on the scales, it's going to make it look like you've actually gained weight, when in all reality, it's water weight, it's not fat weight. So just be careful with that. You don't want to go too low on fat and too high on carbs. And remember what we just talked about, if you go too high on carbs, if your body doesn't need it at that time, it's going to be stored in fat cells. So that's where you're actually going to have some problems there as well. Also, when your body fat is too low, you're going to risk lowering your testosterone and estrogen levels, which is not what you want to do if you're wanting to look lean and strong. If you're trying to lean up and gain your strength, you've got to have the testosterone and the estrogen produced within your body. Now here is another misconception: going too low of carbs. And when you go too low of carbs, you're going to go too high on fat. Well, here's the problem. It's not really the fat, it's the carb part. You end up actually relying on ketones by fat metabolism and gluconeogenesis, which basically it wears down your muscles in order to get your energy, to keep your energy going. It helps to meet your glucose needs. So what happens is, out of your 3 macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats, the quickest source of energy is your carbohydrates. And when you cut that out, your brain and your thinking is actually going to suffer, and so is your energy, because the fat does not provide enough energy quickly, and neither does the protein. So higher intensity exercise is going to require a really steady, supple supply of dietary glucose, which is carbohydrates. You're going to need that because that's your best route to actually go for having that higher intensity. And of course the foods to consume for that is the good starchy carbs, like your sweet potatoes are really good. Your grains are really good. So too low carbs diets actually destroys the metabolism. It makes you really foggy headed. This is also kind of pertains to the Dr. Atkins diet that had come around its second time back several years ago, about 10 to 15 years ago. And there's been lots of damage that's actually been caused by that diet because they go too low in carb. Basically, it's just an all-fat, all-protein diet consumption, which is going to overwork the kidneys. And we've had several people end up on dialysis because they have destroyed the kidneys due to going too low in carb and too high on fat or too high on protein. So you really need to watch that. You've got to have carbs to fuel the body to get it going. So especially if you're going to be doing longer runs, 5Ks, definitely you need carbs for that. If you're going to up it to 10Ks or half marathons or full marathons, you definitely need to have the carbs for sustained energy. So those are two big, huge diet problems I see often. So don't be afraid to eat your fats. They're good, healthy fats. Don't be afraid to eat your carbs. You've got to have the right balance between them. There's a reason why God made both of those, and they definitely play different roles in your body. So you have to have those. Woo! That's a lot of information to digest right there. Now let's move into physical activity. Okay, we have moved into physical activity. It is 80% what you eat and 20% physical activity. The benefits of it is definitely burns more calories than sitting on a couch. It definitely counteracts obesity. It increases the resolve to change habits. It gives you that natural feel-good hormone. You know that dopamine type addiction that we talked about earlier? The same thing goes for physical activity. It kind of gets you addicted to it because you like that feeling, that rush, that high when you're exercising. It also helps to control appetite. It preserves the body's muscle. You're constantly putting some stress on the muscles and on the bones, so that definitely preserves the bones as well as the muscle. Of course, it's going to increase your metabolic rate because of the muscle, the amount of muscle you're holding in or possibly increasing. And it correlates to that long-term success. There was actually a study done that said that the top 5 things that you need in order to have long-term success of 5 years or longer, and the number one thing was not diet, the number one thing was exercise. And the last one, it definitely helps to reduce the stress. You can control the stress so much better when you have your body going. It starts your day off right. If you can get it going in the morning, or even if you exercise at nighttime, it still helps to reduce that stress. The best thing to do is to put on a pair of walking shoes when you're stressed instead of heading to the refrigerator. All right, let's talk about a little bit of facts about some physical activity. For one, I hear a lot of times, well, my muscle just turned into fat. No, it's two totally separate tissues. It's kind of like saying my apples turns into oranges. That you just can't do that. What happens is when a person stops exercising but continues to eat more calories, the muscles will actually decline in size because they're not being stimulated, and the fat cells will actually start to fill up with the extra calories that you're consuming. So one shrinks while the other one increases. Regular exercise may actually decrease your appetite and increase your need for fluids, which oftentimes thirst is mistaken for hunger. So grab your water instead of grabbing the food. Don't overdo it either. Your body definitely needs time to rest and recover. Too much of a good thing can actually have a negative consequence, and that can lead to exercise burnout. Also, drink just 1 or 2 swallows, about 2 ounces, every 10 to 15 minutes to prevent against nausea during physical activity. Don't drink a ton, and avoid all of the extra Gatorade and sports drinks until you've been exercising for at least 90 minutes. That's really good to help to supply and replenish the body with extra salts and sugars at that time. Exercise when it's best for you too. If you're not a morning person, don't attempt to exercise in the mornings. You need to go when it actually fits into your daily schedule. Now, if you can make yourself get up in the morning and you're okay with it, and maybe it's even better when you have a friend that you get up with to go do the exercise, do that. Whatever actually is best that fits into your day, go with the route that's best for you. And a few more things. If you eat right before exercising, you really need to wait at least an hour, hour and a half to 2 hours before you actually exercise, just to give yourself some time for it to digest. Otherwise, you're going to be sick. It prevents against nauseousness. For low intensity exercises, fat burning really doesn't take place until about 20 minutes of exercise, so just know that. High intensity, you actually start off burning fat and then you go into glycogen burn, which we're going to cover more detail on that later, and you want the glycogen burn to take place. And your body produces a growth hormone, and it is actually your best friend. This burns the fat. It also consumes, by consuming carb, you're actually going to deaden that production. And the growth hormone is produced two different ways. During your sleep, that's why you need at least 7 hours of sleep, and it's also produced during weightlifting. And you really get the biggest boost of growth hormone on your biggest muscles. So usually for women, it's the legs is when you get the biggest boost of the growth hormone. But keep in mind, it does burn the fat, but by consuming a carb, it deadens the production of the growth hormone. Like your, if that's, because that takes place, you really want to eat about 30 minutes after you get done working out, so that prevents the deadening from taking place, and you can basically ride out that growth hormone as long as you can to promote that recovery and that muscle to strengthen it up and to lean it out. Okay, now I want to show you a breakdown of what exactly takes place with your your 3 macronutrients that we have talked about. And macronutrients, again, is your carbs, your proteins, and your fats. You're at rest, basically, while you're sleeping. You're mostly burning your fat. 60% of your fats are being burned up. And in the green there, it's your glucose plus glycogen. Basically, that's your carb or your carb storage. And then in the yellow, there's your protein. Only 2 to 5% of your protein is actually being burned up. So at light to moderate exercise, such as walking, nothing real high intense, but like walking, at 55% of your fats are being burned up, 40% of your glucose or glycogen is actually being burned up, and only 2 to 5% of your proteins. Now let's move into more of the high-intensity sprint type exercises and the high-intensity endurance exercises, the last two columns. You basically move from a fat burn into a glucose plus glycogen burn. And you want this to take place because this has to take place before it goes into a long-term fat burn. Now this is intensity while you're exercising, and you want the high intensity to take place because once you quit exercising, if you've had a lot of your glucose plus glycogen burning up during exercising, such as this 95% and the 70% on the last two columns, when you walk away from the gym or you quit exercising, that actually has stimulated your metabolism, and you will be shifting down from a glucose burn into a fat burn for 24 to 48 hours. Now compare that to just the light to moderate exercise. Yes, you're burning 55% fats, but once you quit exercising, you're not going to continue losing the weight, not the 24 to 48 hours that the other two will offer you. So you really get more bang for your buck, so to speak, when it comes to calorie burn and especially fat burn, when you are doing high intensity type endurance and interval and sprint type exercises. And this really 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes of doing this each day is going to send your body into a really quick metabolism. And each person has a fitness level that's so individualized. To one person, their heart rate gets up really fast if they go for a jog because they're just now getting to be where they're exercising. Some people who's exercised for years has to run faster in order to get that up. And it's not just running, it's also lifting weights. I get my high intensity exercise by doing CrossFit, which that definitely will get your heart rate up. Now we're going to talk about our heart rate. It's really important if you want to get into what we call the fat burning zone. You get your heart rate up. So general rule of thumb, you want to take your maximum heart rate, which is about 220, and you subtract your age from that. The figures above on that little chart are actual averages, so use them as just general guidelines. So let's just say, for instance, I'm going to pick on the top number there. Let's just say you're 20 years old. Your average maximum heart rate is at 100%. It's going to be 200 beats per minute. Now you don't want to go that high to be in fat burning. When you really go above 85%, you're doing more of a training your heart than going into fat burning. Over to the right of that is the target heart rate zone for fat burning at 50 to 85% of that 100% heart rate. So for this 20-year-old, they would need to get their heart rate up 100 to 170 beats per minute. Now not everybody's got a minute to sit around and look at a clock. So if you have a second hand on your watch, you can do a 10-second count and find your pulse by either finding it around your neck or around your wrist. When I'm exercising, I find it around my neck a lot quicker than my wrist. And do that 10-second count. So for that 20-year-old, they would need 17 to 23 beats to be within that target fat burning zone. If they're above it, they need to slow down. If they're below the 17, they need to speed it up. That's just a good way to kind of figure out if you are in the fat burning zone. Of course, 50% isn't going to burn as much fat as the 85%, so try to stay with the upper limit. Another way to kind of look at it too to see if you've got your heart rate up, it's called the talk test. You should be able to actually maintain a comfortable conversation while exercising. If you're like panting really hard to where you're gasping and trying to get your breath because it's hard to talk, you probably need to slow it down some. And again, that's called the talk test. It's just kind of generalized too, and it's normally going to keep you around the lower part of the fat burning zone. But it's just a good way to kind of judge it. Now, most women want to tend to lean more towards the cardio, while men tend to lean more towards the weightlifting, which, that's the general rule of thumb. Now, both of them are very important, so both of them really need to do both. And the reason why I'm going to show you a comparison here. If you look at this chart, there was actually a study done of 205 males. There was a group of them that did weight training, which was anaerobic, and they lifted weights for an hour. And the other group ran. They ran 9-minute miles for a full hour. Now, in that 1 hour, the weightlifting group burned 480 calories. But in that 1 hour for the running group, they burned 1,068. Quite a bit of a difference. Now, 2 hours after the workout, the muscles were still very, very just pumped and going strong because they did a really high intensity exercise type thing with weights. And that got the muscles stimulated with the weight training group. So they were burning 300 to 400 calories after 2 hours after the workout was complete. Whereas the running group was burning 100 to 150 calories on an average 2 hours after the workout was done. Now, 3 to 15 hours after the workout, the weight training group was still burning. Their muscles were still on fire and they were still burning calories, 250 to 400 calories per hour. Whereas the aerobic running group, they had basically stopped after 2 hours. They weren't burning any more calories. So the calories burned at the end of the day, if you can compare that, basically 1,030 for the weight training up to 1,168 for the running, they really averaged about the same in that whole period of time. But just knowing that, if you combine that together, you can get quite a bit of calories burned within the first hour. If you do some interval type training where you actually combine weights in with aerobic, you're going to burn quite a bit of calories for an extended period of time. Some studies show 24 hours, and some say it shows all the way up to 48 hours where your actual caloric burn is still going from that mixed workout of weight training and the cardio. So that's very important. High intensity interval training is great for that. Some Tabatas are also great for that too, but usually the high intensity interval training and CrossFit training is also very, very well because it's catered to that as well, because it's based on the aerobic and anaerobic mixing together. Okay, bear with me here as I try to go into how the metabolism works with your cardio from fat burn to carb burn back into fat burn. As your intensity level starts to go up, you go from a fat burn. As your fat burn drops there in the red, your carb burn actually goes up. And this is called a crossover effect. So basically, your low intensity exercise where you have a low VO2 max, which is basically a lower heart rate, lower breathing rate, your fats are your primary fuel. This is like you're walking at a good casual pace, going for a stroll around the stadium or something, just walking the track. High intensity exercise is when you kick it up a notch, when you start jogging, when you start running, when you start lifting weights and timing your weights and making sure you're getting them done pretty quick. This increases your VO2 max or your heart rate and your breathing rate. And it switches from a fat burn as your fuel to a carb burn as your fuel because it's pulling all of your carbs from your muscles, the glycogen stored in your muscles, and they are becoming depleted, which is wonderful. You want this to happen. This is called the crossover effect. So basically describes the shift from the fat to carb metabolism as exercise intensity increases. Now, the crossover effect is all due to a recruitment of fast muscle fibers and increasing the blood levels of epinephrine, which is a huge key right there. So hold on to that thought of epinephrine. You want all this to take place. Now, if you're lifting weights and you have a bar above your head and then you put it down and you're taking a breath, well, when you have it above your head, you're actually you're burning carbs. You're in the high intensity. You put it down to take a breath, you're actually going back into fat mode because you're calming down your low intensity, but yet your carbs are still on fire and firing off. When you pick that bar back up again and start lifting it above your head, you start right back into the high intensity exercise. And what you have is a crossover on top of a crossover. The more you do it, you're going to have crossovers on top of crossovers, and this is called a rippled effect. Now, this is very important because the more ripple effect that takes place, the better your fitness becomes. This stimulates your metabolism, and this is very, very important that you go into high intensity with prolonged exercise, about 30 to 45 minutes, and actually a max of a most 1 hour a day to get this ripple effect in order to keep the fat burn going for 24 to 48 hours later. Now, take a close look at it again and soak it in, and bear with me as I walk you through this on the prolonged part. Now remember, you have the ripple effects taking place, several crossovers on top of crossovers. Okay? Now you're doing a prolonged exercise. There's actually going to be a shift very, very soon from carb metabolism, which is burning up of your glycogen, back down towards fat metabolism. And the reason why is because all of your carbs have been depleted from your muscle stores when you exhaust them, which is very important if you want to go into that fat metabolism. Now, the next thing that takes place, basically, that's caused by your increased rate of lipolysis, which is your fat metabolism. There's going to be a breakdown of triglycerides and glycerol and free fatty acids. But the biggest thing here, remember that name, epinephrine? Well, it's stimulated by rising blood levels of that epinephrine due to the crossover effects of high-intensity interval training. So fat metabolism will start to become stimulated because of the rising carbohydrates that are being burned up. So prolonged exercise means more fat burn and better fit. Now bear with me as I take you into the next step of what happens with prolonged fat burn. All right, and here's our next chart. This is the prolonged exercise. After you've done the crossover effects, boom! The carbohydrates are starting to drop because you're burning them all up out of your muscles. And guess what kicks in? Fat. It's your fat burn. Yes, that is your fat cells crying that's dripping all over the floor. So, your fat actually starts to burn up. When you walk away from the gym or you walk away from the track, basically your body is a metabolic burning machine now because you have stimulated it with high intensity. So now, depending on how much intensity you put your body through, you can be burning calories even while you sleep, while you're eating dinner, whatever you're doing, for 24 to 48 hours after that high intensity training. Again, it all depends on how much you pushed your body. That's what's going to stimulate that metabolism, and you're going to go into that fat burn. So, prolonged exercise is great. So if you're going to compare just casual walking, yes, you can burn up fat calories during casual walking. You sure can. But what you burn up basically is what you're going to burn up within that hour. It's not going to prolong it. You do high intensity training, any form of high intensity training, that actually is going to promote crossover effects, which will prolong your fat burn in the long run. And that definitely brings about physical fitness so much quicker. It brings about strong toned muscles, which stimulates the metabolism. That's where your metabolic fire is really at. And it helps to decrease your body fat percent. It gives you that more chiseled look, and definitely the strength is there. So get moving. Exercise is definitely a part of the key. It is 80% what you eat, but when you do that 20% physical activity, put 110% of your best into it.
This is my kind of thing. I ain't talking about the God you heard about my mama. Put the gun out, dog. We down the Heineken. Man, God understand. What's coming again? I get you think that God is kind of like your mama.
Okay, so workout's over. You need to make sure you stretch very, very good because that actually helps to release all the lactic acid buildup in your muscles and prevents a lot of soreness the rest of the day and the following day. And then refuel with a good liquid. This is the best time to consume any form of a liquid protein. This right here is a protein with a little bit of carbohydrate. So definitely want to try to fuel your body back up, because if you've depleted all your muscles, all your glycogen stores, that needs to be refueled. And best way to do it. And it's also the best time to consume a fruit if you want a fruit, so because it absorbs very quickly within your body. All right, we're coming to a close now. I definitely want you to take a look at your daily reflections. And daily means try to look at it every day and work on it every day. Not anything real intense, but just definitely work on it so that you're constantly reminded of good, healthy lifestyle changes. Take a look at your barriers and hurdles in the back in the appendix. Work on the ones that you have previously chosen to work on. Continue working on those until you have it mastered. Now choose 1 to 3 more that you can actually add to the ones you're currently working on. Go with just one if you're not real confident in adding in more. Keep in mind, it is a process. It's a journey. So, little bits at a time. Think about how you're implementing each one in your daily walk, your daily lifestyle. So, know that you can lean on the Lord for that. Daily food diary. Take a look at that too. Are you using MyFitnessPal or some other app, or possibly using the one in the back of the book where you can make a copy of it and turn that in to like a designated person if you want to, or have your own little support going with a few people. Take a look too at your water. Are you consuming at least half of your body weight in water? And are you getting enough sleep? Research shows at least 7 hours of sleep. You've got to have that growth hormone production that takes place in the middle of the night. Are you consuming enough sufficient healthy calories? You should never go too low on your caloric consumption. It's going to sabotage that metabolism. So you don't want that to take place. And you got to fuel your body. For anybody who's really going to do some long distance running, you've got to fuel your body up with those carbs. How are your emotions or feelings? We tend to be driven by emotions and feelings. Well, pay attention to that. See what actually drives you, what determines the attitude for the day. Best thing to do is put on that pair of walking shoes and get out and go walking. You know, anything to do that the enemy will try, anything that he can to try to pull you down and make you focus on those feelings instead of focusing on what God has actually given us. What is your power punch scripture for the week? I'm talking the one that's going to give you that motivation, that smile on your face, that brings you joy. What is the power punch that can actually drive you through those emotions and feelings that want to pull you down? What's your power punch scripture? Find one. Memorize it. Plaster it all over your house if you have to. Also, what is your prayer for the week? What's your prayer of thankfulness? What are your weaknesses that you want to lay out in pure transparency, just walking out the front door naked, right to God? He knows it anyway. In our weakness, He is made strong. Allow Him to work through you in those weak areas.